Of what possible use could a rock-heavy, dirty, cheap, industrial blackened wire have for me? Or for that matter for you? Well, I'll tell you what uses, pals. Well, exactly. I'll tell you a whole passel of exciting, creative, and interesting uses for this beautiful, versatile, responsive, neglected, surprising, magnificent material, steel wire. I'm Keith LeBou, and you are in the inner sanctum of Studio Stuffsmith here in Sydney, Australia. This is Stealing Beauty, Chains, Clasps, and Forms in Steel Wire. In the early days of my experimentation in 3D materials, when I was running around to different art supply stores, hardware stores, flea markets, junkyards, scrap metal yards, all these places, I was finding materials and bringing them back to my studio and playing with them and seeing what felt right and what didn't. I wasn't haunting art supply stores. I'd gone to art school. I knew very well what was in your average art supply store. It was in the hardware store that things started to have creative potential pop into my mind, because I was interested in all these reclaimed, cast-off materials to work with. What better than more industrial, home use, handyman hardware type tools? It was there at one of these hardware stores that I came across this big beast. Now on this particular day, I went outside the hardware store where they keep the chain link fences and the concrete supplies, and I saw sitting on the shelf this single spool of what kind of looked like wire. There was so much rust on it, I wasn't initially sure what I was looking at. Had a $3 price tag hanging from it, so I just kind of grabbed it and picked it up and was like, good heavens, you know, this weighs a ton. And I took the edge and I bent it, and I went, whoa, look at that, it bent pretty easily. Well, I felt really bad for this stuff because it looked like, you know, when I picked it up, it left a ring of rust on the shelf, and I thought, geez, it looks like this hardware store was built around this spool of wire. It's been here so long. So I took it and paid for it and brought it home, started playing with it in the studio, and immediately the lights started snapping on. I couldn't believe how versatile this material was, how it responded in my hands. It was relatively easy to bend and work with, but when I put it somewhere, it stayed there. And then I was dealing with the fact that it would start to rust, and I was like, oh, there's got to be a way to get it to keep from rusting and to work with that, or to control the rusting so I could color it the way I wanted. All of those things. And over time, over years of playing with it and patiently working with it and discovering its bad and good qualities and how I could tackle each of those, I started to learn its vocabulary. 24 years later, I'm able to offer this to you in a workshop form. One of the things I kind of couldn't understand when I started using this stuff is why it wasn't more commonly being used in jewelry making and in art making. And I had to learn a bit about the history of this material and see how it's shifted over time to really understand why it kind of needs to be reintroduced as a viable material to make artwork with. So I'd like to give you a little history of that steel wire. Before the 19th century Industrial Revolution in Europe, wire had to be handmade completely. A big sheet of metal had to be cut into strips and forged out into very thin, long strips and then coiled up. And this hand-forged steel wire would then be coated in tin, which would slow down the rusting process to keep it from corroding. And this tinned wire would be carried around through the townships in Europe, beginning in Slovakia in the 17th century. They would travel around, itinerant, nomadic people who were incredibly skilled in working wire. They could come to your house, and if there was a glass jug that had broken, they would ask if there was anything that needed mending. You could not go out and replace those items very easily. Things like glassware was extremely expensive. These tradesmen were known as tinkers. And they would take that broken jug, that water jug that had shattered into a dozen pieces, and they would be able to carefully piece it back together, and then using this tinned wire, they would be able to create a tight basket structure around this jug and make it watertight. This is how skilled they were, with very simple pliers and just years and years of experience that had been passed down over generations. A tinker would be able to produce a lot of very useful items for around the house. Mousetraps, kitchenware, a lot of whisks and sieves and all sorts of useful tools that way. Tinkers would often have competitions amongst themselves of skill to see who could dress an egg, a raw egg, in the most ornate fashion using just wire and tools in the shortest amount of time. So incredible skills that were passed down. This was accumulated knowledge of hundreds and hundreds of years. As the Industrial Revolution came into place in the 19th century in Europe, that tradition started to dwindle. Tinkers were no longer seen roaming from place to place because wire could now be made in factories. So wire was much easier to procure, and the Industrial Revolution started to spawn the replaceable object. When something broke, it didn't necessarily have to be mended until it was limping through another 50 years. It could be replaced if you had the means to do it. And so those factors contributed to the decline of this incredibly nuanced art of working with steel wire. By the end of the Second World War, the use of steel wire in this way, as a tinker would work with it in a utilitarian way, was pretty much finished. But it was held on by a few craftspeople who used it artistically, and they carried the use of this wire through, some of the traditional uses of this wire, through to the wire work we now know today. One artist was a man named Sir Alfred Gilbert. He worked a lot, a very eccentric maker of enamel work and other jewelry work. He was a sculptor, which is what he was most famous for, but he made incredible steel wire jewelry that was just pretty much just mangled lumps of steel wire with beautiful gems and jewels set into these twists of wire. Unbelievably forward thinking for the 1890s. The other is Alexander Calder. Everyone knows Calder for his mobiles and his sculptural work and his different forms of artwork, but what people don't really know him as widely for was his jewelry work. He was a jeweler through his whole career, and his use of wire is some of the most creative work ever seen in modern wire working. So you would do well to seek out the book Calder Jewelry, which is a compendium of his work as a jeweler throughout his career, and it will just trigger your mind into the very open possibilities of working with wire. All this history serves to set the scene for stealing beauty, for how to take this wire and work with it and feel the weight of the knowledge of the many uses that this wire has had throughout history and the open artistic potential for it in today's world. During the workshop, we're going to begin by learning all about the steel wire itself, what its properties are, how to bend it, the tools to use to work it, how to soften it, how to harden it, all the material you need, the info you need to have the work in your hands and to get started working. Then we'll get our aggressions out and we'll hammer the stuff really hard. We'll forge it. We'll learn how to change the shape of the wire and harden it up and to really create a different kind of look and structure and feel to it by forging. Then we'll turn to the beginning of the chain making process, jump rings. It's the bones, the skeleton of a chain, the links that bring together the other beautiful elements that you'll be making to make that chain. After we do the jump rings, we'll start making other beautiful shaped links and begin to make our first chain that we'll put together. We'll then complete the circle by learning how to make clasps to hold the chains together and bails to hang other things from it. We will follow that by learning structural forms, how to be able to take wire and encase other materials, to entrap other materials to work in with the chains that you've made. And finally, it'll be time to fly. We'll be experimenting, learning how to take all the knowledge that we've learned thus far and be able to apply it in any number of exciting directions that you can take and run with. So come on and join the chain gang and share with me my 24 years of tips, tricks, and techniques to get you making beautiful creations with this most magic and yummy material, steel wire. And you'll be stealing beauty just like I